If you think that Trudeau, a person who is willing to freeze assets over economic damage to target political enemies without due process, and willing to force striking postal workers back to their jobs by declaring their absence a harm to the Canadian way of life and pushing through back to work legislation, if you really think that these things added together aren't laying the brickwork for a system in which labor power is incapable of mobilizing, then you are woefully, insanely naive. We have to recognize how these systems of control get to where they are, affect things the way they do, and frankly, the fact that so many people on the left don't understand how this is far more dangerous than the military being sent in to clear a blockade is very worrying to me. All right, look, I just want to argue with people, but I think we have to lay the groundwork, okay? Proper antagonism, like a fortress, needs strong foundations. So we will build the foundations, all right? And then we will build the battlements. So, okay, as I imagine you know, because I've talked about it, there's a trucker protest going on in Canada right now. And I'm downplaying it a little bit by using that language. Essentially, a combination of people who actually do trucking and an assorted retinue of right-wing grifters have assembled to protest ineptly. They're protesting COVID mandate for trucking laws, but now they're just anti-everything. Well, it all gets so muddled, but essentially they're right-wingers, they're bad, they're stupid, they're idiots, and they are blocking essential infrastructure. No kidding. Their little trucking brigade is actually stalling up a significant portion of trade to the country. See, Canada gets a lot of trade through relatively narrow roadways. You know, the United States, of course, does as well to an extent, but I think we have more options here, whereas in Canada, I feel like, you know, you have like long roads through the tundra, and then it goes through a city, or like it passes the border, and it's like, well, if you don't go through that road, like, kind of tough to get through, actually. I think that the number quoted was that it was costing the government $500 million. Not the government, sorry. The economy was suffering about $500 million a day in losses as a product of these barricades. About 360 million a day. A lot of money. A lot of money. Seriously. I mean, if you want to extrapolate that out across the entirety of a year, you know, that would exceed Canada's military budget several times over, just in the economic losses from one of the barricades taking place. It is some significant stuff. Now, I want to make this perfectly clear right up front, and I don't think this is in question, in spite of the people on Twitter we're going to be talking about soon, but I am super duper duper against the trucking protest bullshit, okay? It's cringe, it's dumb, I don't like it. It seems inept, it's pointless. Wear your mask, get your shots, I don't care. Drive off a cliff if you don't want to. I don't care. I don't care about you. You're meaningless to me. Not truckers. Truckers are wonderful people with tough jobs. Those particular truckers, a great many of whom aren't even truckers, really. Like, just... So, that's forthcoming. However, some of you may have heard, possibly through me, it is currently, literally, 1984 in Canada. Take a look at this, folks. Trudeau vows to freeze anti-mandate protesters' bank accounts. Look at that. Now, I saw this last night, right before I went to bed. I mean, it was like 1, 2 a.m. I saw that and I thought, wow, that's actually really, really scary. That's actually quite frightening. And I tweeted as such, you know, as one does. And I was met with criticism and drama. And I haven't stopped tweeting since then. I slept 5 hours, woke up, and began tweeting once more. There are a lot of people arguing in here. Like, a lot of people, you know? Lauren Southern and Tim Pool quote tweeted me to agree with me. You know, there are lefties in my comments disagreeing with me. What's going on? Well, we'll talk about it, okay? But in order for us to talk about it, we have to understand what exactly this news article means when they say Trudeau vows to freeze anti-mandate protesters' bank accounts, okay? So let's find out together. We're learning today, okay? You get that? Like I said, Proper foundations, all right? So, here is another BBC article. I've read a little bit more into this in the interim time, but, you know, let's stick with news articles for now because they're a little less boring to look at. The Emergencies Act. What is the Emergencies Act, friends? Well, the Emergencies Act is the thing that Trudeau is threatening to invoke. The Emergencies Act essentially is, as I understand it, a provision which is approved by their legislator. The president can't just act it unilaterally. And he already has. Thank you. The Emergencies Act has to be invoked in line with the Prime Minister. Listen, okay? There are countries that are America, and there are countries that should be America. The president, Justin Trudeau, can't unilaterally enact this. It has to pass through a legislative process. And what it does, as I understand it, having read up on it, is that it gives Justin Trudeau... Wait, actually, hold on. Can we just take a second to get mad at Canadians for a second? It's actually so revealing you say that, though. Nuzzy Rat, you are a Canadian. I'm sorry, do you know that I talk about issues in countries all over the world? Do you think I get all their shit right? The thrust of the issue is what matters principally here. You get that, right? The actual, like, political arguments. Like, you said president, how entitled do you have to be as a Canadian? The significant political distinctions between my country and theirs actually invalidate any concerns you might have about overreach of government. Shut the fuck up. Do you have any idea how many sniveling bitch-cuck Canadians I've had in my replies on Twitter who have been screaming and crying that an American dare talk about their country's interests? You don't have a country, okay? You have a fractional portion of a country that is kept alive by your parasitic attachment to my massive behemoth United States of America, okay? You don't deserve to talk about your shit, all right? Jesus fucking Christ. This is the biggest national crisis you've had in fucking decades, and it's truckers on a road? Holy shit. You've been brought to your knees by a fucking right-wing protest, okay? Shut the fuck up. So anyway, as I was saying, let's get back to the foundations. Talk to a Canadian legal scholar. The Emergencies Act allows Justin Trudeau to go Super Saiyan. That's actually the term in their in the law. In the law of the issue. Essentially, it means you can do a lot of stuff. You can do a lot of crazy stuff. I mean, the term used here, the law will grant Mr. Trudeau's government extraordinary powers. Big word when we're talking about emergency powers given during a time of crisis. For 30 days, including the power to prohibit public assembly, travel, and the use of specific property. Okay? So, when the Emergencies Act is invoked, it really is like the big red button, you know? Usually, the term emergency powers has a lot of negative connotations for reasons that I hope should be kind of intuitive to a person on the left. But usually there are different, like, thresholds. As I understand it, the Emergencies Act in Canada is a relatively big red button. It's a pretty, it's a fairly large red button, you know? It's very bright red. It's flashing, you know? He goes very Super Saiyan, okay? So I'd like to take a couple of, you know, we'll look at it. We'll look at a couple of pointers here. I'll make myself nice and big so you can see my exasperated expression the next time a Connecticut talks in chat. The Emergencies Act, passed in 1988, bestows the government with added powers in terms of national crisis. The situation must meet a high bar. Specifically, an urgent and critical situation that seriously endangers the lives, health, or safety of Canadians. So in this case, I would actually say that that criteria is met. $500 million in lost economic activity every single day is actually pretty significant, you know? A certain level of economic disruption is going to go beyond, you know, the chicken nuggies aren't stocked at my local Safeway and go towards the, you know, actual harm being done, not just to people's jobs and livelihoods, but literally to the availability of necessary goods. So, you know, that's something. Though the nuggies are, of course, a big issue in and of themselves. Hold on, I'm sorry, I can't deal with you guys. Vaush, please, the residents in Ottawa suffering noise pollution and harassment. Noise pollution and harassment? Oh, get me my fainting couch, George. Noise pollution and harassment? The Emergencies Act. This isn't an emergency. This is a super emergency. Do we have any nukes, George? Shut up. Shh. Shut up. Oh my God. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. And cabinet may only invoke the legislation if the emergency cannot be addressed by any existing federal law if it exceeds the capacity of the provinces to handle it effectively. Oh my God. Wait, holy shit. Wait, mods, you're free to ban everyone in chat who's complaining. Vaush, it's literally torture levels of noise. I haven't even gotten to the prescriptive statements yet. You realize the Patriot Act was bad and it happened after 9/11, right? 9/11? What do you think the decibels were at that, huh? When the fucking towers fell? Yeah, you're at fucking ground zero dead. The volumes here, well, at least they're not as bad as the Canadian truck. Shut up! Holy shit, I haven't even gotten at the prescriptive statements yet. He's down. When I watch Vaush, I don't expect him to take a comedic tone while lightheartedly discussing issues that are serious. I mean, I like it when he does that about literally every other topic, but now that it's happening in my country, it's actually really upsetting and invalidating. Oh my God. You people. Holy shit. So anyway, the Emergencies Act outlines 4 different types of emergencies. Public welfare emergencies, public order emergencies, international emergencies, and war emergencies. If the legislation is invoked this week, it will likely be under the public order category. Again, the criteria here is strict. Lawful protests do not qualify. This is, of course, not a lawful protest. So that's not a meaningful distinction here. Instead, the situation must be considered a threat to the security of Canada as defined by the Canadian Security Intelligence Service Act. So the CSIS, I believe, is their feds here. The law outlines 4 possible scenarios: espionage or sabotage, foreign influenced activities, threats or use of active serious violence for political, religious, and ideological objectives, covert unlawful acts intended to undermine or overthrow the constitutionally... Oh, it's your CIA, not your Fed? Okay, gotcha. Constitutionally established government. So, talking about these premises here. Espionage or sabotage, I don't really think that's applicable. Foreign influenced activities is an element that I see people really hamming on online because the crowdfunding that is being used to support these protests comes largely for America. But I think that's a really weak justification, because in the modern day, like, crowdfunding is always going to come from like multiple, like, I think that's a fairly weak justification. Threats or use of acts of serious violence for political, religious, or ideological reason. I think this one's probably a bit more justified, at least in terms of their perspective. There have been plenty of protesters who have either been found to have or have been shown to be planning for some kind of violent insurrection. They've got guns, Don't get me wrong, I like guns, but got all that. And covert unlawful acts intended to undermine or overthrow the constitutionally established government. And they seem to kind of want to do that as well. But let's be real here, okay? The reason people are freaking out over this, the reason the government is talking about all of this, is because of the economic damage that is being done. That's why, okay? It's not about threats to the government. That's not why. Let's be real here. It's about the economic damage, which is infinitely more impactful to the entirety of the country than the potential threat. People are really fear-mongering over the guns that have been found, but until they actually storm the Capitol, I'm gonna guess that the economic damage seems to me like the the bigger point here. So, what situation do we have? We have a situation. The economic damage is already affecting the U.S. Okay, but our GDP is much larger. Yes, but it is. So the issue that I have here, okay, is that to me, the damage that is being done as a product of these protests does not justify the actions that are being taken. Let me elaborate on that. So I'll go back now to the original BBC article. Just one moment. Yes, here we go. I'll go back to the original article here, and I'd like to read a couple of these provisions for you. So again, vows to freeze anti-mandate protesters' bank accounts. And then it goes on for some time explaining what and why that is. But essentially, here, let's get to the critical point here. Ms. Freeland said they were broadening Canada's terrorist financing rules to cover cryptocurrency and crowdfunding platforms. So essentially, they are looking to define the crowdfunding, which is being used to supply the trucking protesters, as terrorist financing, and therefore their protests as terrorism. So if you're familiar with the history of labor rights and the fight for them in the West, then already some alarm bells should be ringing in your head, but we'll continue for a bit. It's all about following the money. She spoke after hackers released details of what they said were 93,000 donations for the truckers, totaling 8.4 million to the crowdfunding platform Give, Send, Go, because I think their thing got booted off GoFundMe. The Emergencies Act requires a high legal bar to be involved. It may only be used in urgent and critical situations that seriously endanger the lives, health, and safety of Canadians. And as an American, I can tell you with great confidence that language like that may sound like a high bar, but it really is just, when the government decides it's necessary. If you don't give a strict threshold, they'll do what they want. Hold on, I'm terribly sorry. I just saw something in chat that makes me... Vaush, you're absolutely wrong. This is not a pro-worker movement. Did I, at any point... I want you to rewind. Actually, I'll give you a chance, okay? I want you to rewind because or possibly call a pharmacist to get some medication for your schizophrenia, because at no point did I even suggest. Where did you hear that? Where did you get that from? Please, I'm begging you. Take care of yourself, man. Don't be watching political live streams when your mental health is on the line. Anyway. So, high legal bar, etc., etc. The Canadian Civil Liberties Association disagreed, warning the move threatens our democracy and our civil liberties. Wow, who would have thought a Civil Liberties Association would disagree with the invocation of an Emergency Power Act that would threaten people's civil liberties? Will Trudeau succeed? I guess he already has, blah, blah, blah. Look, here's the skinny of the situation, okay? The protesters are doing big damage. Big damage. Big damage, okay? It's big bad. Big not good. And they're big bad people. They're big bad people doing big bad damage. Get that? Okay? And the government needs to get rid of that damage. Needs to prevent it somehow. Here's the issue. I did a little bit of reading, and it turns out that Canada is really dumb. You guys cede way too much power to your provinces. See, the federal government of Canada can't send in the troops to disband a situation without the express permission of the leader of a province. The provincial governments have to specifically request it. Outside of the invocation of emergency powers, which is what we're talking about here, the federal government doesn't have the ability, and the provincial government is not requesting help. Of Quebec, is that correct? Quebec is not asking for help because they don't want to. Yeah, Quebec, because Québécois, of course, they have to have the worst imaginable take on every possible issue. I thought America was too federalist, but no, they actually can. This is like some states' rights bullshit, yeah. Or Alberta, apparently, yeah. They are not allowing for, they're not allowing for the military to come in to solve this issue. Now, I know what you're thinking. The military? We don't need the military. Okay, why don't we just send the police in? Well, here's the problem, folks. What are police if not pigs? The police aren't doing anywhere near enough. The Ottawa police chief resigned 30 minutes ago over the COVID protests. See, that's the issue when police departments are completely infiltrated with proto-fash and white supremacists. It's that they're really unwilling to do anything about the other fash and white supremacists. It's actually quite difficult. It's not just that. I think there was some video on Twitter that's circulating. At least I saw Hassan quote tweeting it or posting it or some shit like that. But, oh yeah, here we go. Here's the police over at the bridge, I believe, or is this the bridge or just another pathway? We've got the police just making real friendly. Thank you for saving our country, sir. Thank you for saving our country from the mandates. Thank you, sir. Thank you. You're keeping our country safe, sir. The police aren't doing shit. Sorry. Police aren't doing shit. So, what do you do if you can't send the military in without emergency powers, and you can't, and the police just aren't doing anything? Well, I guess in Trudeau's case, you pass emergency powers. So here's the argument that I want to make, and this is the last time I'll talk prescriptively, and then we're just going to scream at people on Twitter. Okay? Great threat on why police haven't been effective. Oh, please, team, yes, 100%. Let me see. Policing posture in Ottawa right now. This is where the police chief has just resigned. So let's see. Ottawa police have the tools to lay fines and charges against the occupiers from day one. Noise violations, illegal parking. Oh, and don't get me wrong. These people should be being arrested. The protesters, these trucking protesters, the people who are leaning on the truck horns and stuff, they should be getting pulled out of their trucks by police. Don't get me wrong. Straight to jail. Not even horny jail. Just regular person jail. But again, the police aren't willing to do this because the police are ultimately a far-right institution. You know what we could do to solve this problem? We need, like, some Antifa dudes with spray paint to go sprinting through Ottawa, okay? And you guys need to blackface all the protesters so the police will do something. You guys need to sprint through, you know? Like, the police are chasing after you, and, like, you're like, as you run past, like, an open window in a truck, and they, like, turn to their right and see some blackface guy, and they're like, whoa, it starts shooting, you know? I'm just saying, direct action. Yeah, like a squid, exactly. Is that praxis? That's praxis, I'd say, you know? Anyway, I'm skim reading this thread. It's quite long, so I don't want to read it all out. But I mean, if you're skim reading a little bit right here, then you can see it's police. I'm confused. It's 1984, but you're in favor of it. No, I'm in favor, my friend, of invoking 1983, or actually 1884 would be a little bit closer. Here's the argument that I want to make. In any case, the Emergency Act has to be enacted here because the provincial governments refuse to let the federal government send in military police or the troops without the invocation of the Emergency Act. That act is going to happen no matter what, even though it is a bastard piece of shit act of legislation, even though the Emergency Act, if you actually read into it, is a fucking abominable law that should not exist. If you deal with the tools you have, in this case, this is a situation where it is going to be invoked, and I think that if it is to be invoked, they should send the troops in, not freeze people's bank accounts. I think it is infinitely preferable. Infinitely preferable. Oh, don't worry, Demon Mama, that's coming up. In your words, we do have receipts. Were you not against this during, like, the George Floyd protests? I hate it when you say stuff like that. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. The equivocacy between the BLM protests and the trucking ones. Look, let's talk for a moment about protesting, all right? Now, I am generally in favor of the ability to protest because the ability to protest is one of the most effective ways of challenging state power, and challenging state power is good because nation-states are bullshit. Great stuff, okay? However, obviously, not all protests are good. There are protests which are actually quite bad. Sometimes the illegality of the protests reaches a point where I think it's acceptable to morally condemn them, not because of their illegality, but because illegality in this case overlaps with morally bad or harmful. So I don't oppose the January 6th insurrection because it was illegal. I oppose it because it was immoral. Charlottesville was for a time a legal, lawful protest, and I continue to oppose it. There are rules that we have to establish with how the state is expected to deal with protests. Because if we aren't careful with that, we set very bad precedents moving forward. So let me give you guys a broader example. This is something that I got a little bit of flack off for during the BLM protests, but I expect the police to crack down on protests. You can still criticize them when they do it, but I expect them to do it. Say, for example, that the downtown area of a city has been in a sort of lawless state for 2 weeks or something. I expect the police to come in at some point. If they don't, they could potentially be allowing more harm to happen than otherwise. In fact, the fact that the police didn't intervene during the LA riots led to a lot more people dying and getting hurt than would have otherwise. Police involvement in protests and riots can sometimes actually be better. It can be less harmful. But these are always going to be really, really complicated, really, fragmented situations. It's always very contextual. It's something that's going to happen either way, but the ways in which it happens and the reasons for which it happens are really important. Now, again, the Canadian cuck protests, the cucky cuck, truck cuck protests, okay, those, I really don't care if they get arrested at all. It's not because they're illegal. I saw a lot of people on Twitter complaining that they were illegal protests. I don't care if they're illegal. They're bad. They're bad is why. The illegality is just the sentiment which allows the police to get involved, but the fact that they're bad is the reason why I'd be okay with them getting involved. It's also illegal for, say, example, the Wet'suwet'en land back protesters to sabotage rail lines while fighting for their indigenous rights. But even though legally the police are within their right to stop them from doing that, morally, I don't want them to. Law and morality do not perfectly supersede. Law is often a fragmented, inaccurate, superimposing of our moral preconceptions onto a legal framework, and even then, these are only the moral preconceptions of those in power. The law of the bourgeois, essentially. Now, with all of that being said, I just want that to be laid out before anyone criticizes me for, like, this being anti-protest in general, okay? The Canadian government needs to break these protests up, and they can only do so, it seems, through the Emergency Act, right? Now, if the two choices here are military intervention and freezing bank accounts, freezing assets, I would choose the former 10 times out of 10. And I'm going to explain to you why. And boy, have I been arguing on Twitter. People have been mad. They really, they ask me, do you really think it's better to send in men with guns, with bombs, with military equipment? You think that's better than just passively, quietly freezing bank accounts until they leave? Well, yeah, I do, actually. So let me tell you what happens when the military gets sent in to reclaim vital infrastructure, okay? It's a fairly simple procedure, and it's something that we have been doing for literally hundreds of years. This is the old way of doing things. If there are people holding up necessary trade routes, and they're within your country, you send the military to clear that out. Now, here, ideally, is how that would happen, okay? Are you ready for it? So first, the government declares that those areas, those blocked sections of road, of bridge, are to be vacated in 24 hours, or the military will be doing it for them. That is a warning. And that is a fair warning, by the way. You get to walk away at that point. That is a fair warning. If the police just came and arrested everyone, you're going to jail. You can't nope your way out of that one. But if the military gives you a fair warning, you can just leave. The province tried that with the police and it didn't do anything. As we've established, the police are not doing it here, okay? Listen, okay? It's not sufficient to send a bunch of pigs in, half of whom explicitly participate in the protests when they're not on job, okay? The military, on the other hand, a little more actionable, those threats. And then what you do, after 24 hours, is you send the military in. And folks, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. They submit and get arrested, or they die. Will soldiers die too? Yeah, probably. If you think that it's worth invoking an emergency act over reclaiming that territory, then don't hide this, but behind this political correctness. This well, what if we enact state power but hide it behind the scenes, make it quiet, make it covert? Protesters who stay after a military clear-out warning are people who want to die martyrs, or people who think you're bluffing, in which case, well, that's their choice to make. They have the right to leave. At any point in time, they have the right to leave. But when protesters stay, there's a reason why they're doing it, okay? By the way, keep in mind, this is not like clearing out a homeless camp where they live there, or an indigenous community where they live there, or like the Black Panther headquarters where they live there. They're blocking that territory specifically to cause economic damage. They can just leave with no harm. They can just zip. Now, people say, oh, why the blood? Well, here's the thing, folks. State power is a terrifying thing. And when possible, I will always prefer explicit acts of state power to quiet, implicit, covert acts of state power. Always. Always, always, always. Foucault writes on this, how one of the most terrifying elements of the surveillance state is the covert establishment of state power in opposition to its explicit expression. Take a look at China, for example. China, a much less free country than ours, politically speaking, has far fewer criminals, far fewer arrests. Why? They criminalize drug use. They criminalize more stuff than we do. It's not like they have like super lenient laws. It's because they have managed to take state power and streamline it through elements of control that are not explicit. You are conditioned and socialized into conformist ways of thinking pertaining to the Chinese Communist Party. You know your neighbors will rat on you. They have secret police. They have everything they need to keep the state power kept under wraps. Now, does that mean it's good to send in the military to break up protesters? No, obviously this is a horrible situation. We're dealing with lesser shades of evil here. But can you imagine? I want you to imagine, how do you fight a government when speaking out against it, when standing in opposition to it, means not that you face down a police barricade, but rather that you wake up one morning to find all your assets frozen? Absolutely terrifying. No due process in the Emergency Act, by the way. They don't go through courts. Your assets just get frozen. And that is terrifying. Me personally, my seditious language, I would rather be arrested. I would rather know that I have a trial date coming up. I would rather go through the due process, even if it means my life gets put on hold for a while, than the knowledge that anytime some federal agent decides that I'm a threat to the state, they can just freeze my assets. That's really scary. Can you imagine if they'd done that to the BLM protesters? It would have been really quiet, wouldn't it? We wouldn't have had any of those big videos of them cracking down on BLM protesters, none of those videos of police brutality that were used to galvanize, to energize people against the state, to get people to recognize how big the problem was. It would just be quiet. Just protesters would have their faces identified, and they would have to go home. They wouldn't have any other choice. Bank account frozen. You can't buy food next week. It's all quiet. Nothing to mobilize against. No central authority to identify. You know it's coming from the federal government, but there's not some distinct process you can appeal to. Not some individual agent of... There's no badge number that you can file a complaint against. Quiet state power. This is the threat of the Patriot Act. It's the reason why the Patriot Act is bad. The Patriot Act was enacted after 9/11. 9/11 killed more people than these trucking protests have. Does that make the Patriot Act okay? No. And they're not the same thing, of course. But the Patriot Act is scary not just because it expands state power, but because the methods through which it expands state power are covert. They are silent. They are hidden. We can't track them. We can't supervise them. We don't know. Exactly. No charges placed, no direct agents of control. The most authoritarian society, folks, is one in which you never actually see the boot over you. I understand that sounds allegorical and stupid, but I mean it very, very sincerely. Elements of control which you can identify are elements of control you can rally against. Badge numbers and cops' faces being visible are people you could hate, people whose faces you can spread across the internet if they crack down on the back of the head of some mom carrying a kid. And that may be terrible that any of that happened, but at least it was explicit. But the more insidious the authoritarianism, the less necessary it becomes to even do things like send in the military. Do you think like that's the end state of an authoritarian government is one in which they just send the military in to conquer, to do everything, to fix every problem? No, they would never need to. Because the military is explicit and it's bloody and it makes for, good or bad, good television. People are entranced by the sight of conflict, which gives attention to the people who are being cracked down upon. So you prefer Tiananmen Square to modern China? Tiananmen Square was modern China. But yes, 100%. If you had a country which was threatening to go down the road of modern China, and you had Tiananmen Square type situations, real violent outbreaks between the military and protesters, and that could somehow prevent it, that this was a dual path and you could choose to avoid the modern surveillance state, yes. The idea that freedom is worth dying for is literally the founding element of this country. It's literally the bedrock. It's the foundation we built this upon. That's necessary. You can't circumnavigate that. And I'm scared now. Because you know why? Like I said, the Emergencies Act is being passed. It's not because the truckers are far right. It's not because the truckers have guns. It's because they're causing economic disruption. What the f*** do you think a general strike is going to do? You think they couldn't just label people who refuse to go to work as economic terrorists? The funds they're calling terrorist funding right now because they're going through that shady GoFundMe site or whatever, that's your strike funds. You want to take a break off work? Sorry, your assets are frozen. You have no job. The GoFundMe that was funding your strike is terrorist money now. Everything's gone. This isn't a slippery slope. This is identical. Economic disruption is the thing they care about here. The damage to the economy that they're causing with these trucks is minuscule compared to the damage that a general strike would do to the Canadian economy. Not even close. It would shut down, and you would be terrorists. And it's not like they haven't done this shit before. Trudeau's government, because Trudeau is a cuck piece of shit, passed this legislation when the postal workers were striking. Forced a strike to break up. Now imagine if you had a government which was not only willing to pass legislation to break up strikes, insane in and of its own right, but a government willing to declare you a terrorist for striking and to freeze your assets and the systems through which you're getting your strike funds because they consider them terrorist funds. Again, this is not a slippery slope. This is a direct one-to-one. If you think that Trudeau, a person who is willing to freeze assets over economic damage to target political enemies without due process, and willing to force striking postal workers back to their jobs by declaring their absence a harm to the Canadian way of life and pushing through back-to-work legislation, if you really think that these things added together aren't laying the brickwork for a system in which labor power is incapable of mobilizing, then you are woefully, insanely naive. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that like this here is some moral crux because like us letting this happen means that it'll happen again. We can't control what Trudeau's government does. I'm not in control of Trudeau's government. I'm not in his cabinet, to my knowledge. I don't have that power, but we have to recognize how these systems of control get to where they are, affect things the way they do. And frankly, the fact that so many people on the left don't understand how this is far more dangerous than the military being sent in to clear a blockade is very worrying to me. There are so many left-leaning people on Twitter right now. I was arguing. You can go through my tweet history. There are hundreds of tweets from me, all over the place, arguing the military. Well, that's worse because it's blood and there's guns. Do not concern yourself exclusively with the aesthetics of state power. Guns, soldier men, these are aesthetically an element of power. But that does not necessarily mean they are more power, more violent, more indicative of negative power of control than something like freezing bank assets, which is also, of course, a form of violence. You're concerned with the aesthetic there. What looks worse? Well, obviously the military looks worse. That's why they're freezing the assets. Because it saves them the optical harm. Do you think they're doing this for the sake of the protesters? They're doing it because Trudeau's government knows that it makes them look worse to send in soldiers to deal with the problem than it would to just quietly bleed them out. You want the government to look bad when they break up protests. That's my axiomatic value. The government should look terrible when they break up protests. If they are to not look terrible, it should be because we are sufficiently endeared against the protests to begin with, which as I understand it, most Canadians are. If you really think the Canadian trucking protests are so unpopular, then test that unpopularity. Break them up with the military. Will they cry and bitch about it? Sure, they would have anyway, and they're going to about this goddamn Emergency Act. They're going to anyway about the asset freeze. So just don't buy the hype. Don't when the government tries to do some sneaky bullshit to save itself the optical challenge, don't like clap along because don't do that work for them, okay? God almighty. Okay, now I'm looking at chat. Chat, I've been completely not looking at you, but now I'm here. Do not look. Yes, a mistake I have so often made. So Tim Pool was right in saying governments will use the vaccine to gain power. Governments were gaining power before COVID. What the f do you think the Patriot Act was? No, they will do anything to gain power. The whole vaccine shit isn't like the point here. I'm confused what should be done without being able to use the military and police. I don't think you can do anything because of their stupid ass system. Also, outside the military and the police? I think you need that. I'm afraid. Do you think protests and domestic terrorism are discrete binaries, or do you think there's a bit of a spectrum here? Just wondering. It's a meaningless distinction to me because I'm not anti-terrorism as long as the terrorism is based. As long as we're familiar, of course, with ecological trolling, a well-known good kind of terrorism. Trolling. I'm in favor of trolling. Sorry, my tongue slipped. I'm in favor of several kinds of trolling, but you have to make broader considerations outside a legal delineation, like what is terrorism or protesting, because to the state, protests they don't like are terrorism. Didn't they pull this shit with labor like movements back during the early 20th century and late 19th century? They literally dropped bombs on those striking miners. Like it doesn't matter how legitimate your cause is, they'll kill your ass dead if they can get away with calling you a terrorist. Are the trucking people terrorists? Maybe, I don't know. Sure, let's go with yes. To me, it doesn't change the math. Similar methods are used to stop protests that hurt the economy all over the world. Sending in the military to clear out and reclaim vital infrastructure is like the oldest and most common thing to do when your vital infrastructure needs reclaiming, you know? Like, this is very much an old guard way of handling things. It goes back beyond capitalism. It's classic. Listen, it's vintage. You guys don't like a little vintage, you know? Sending in the military to reclaim bridges? My God, they were doing that back in the 100 Years' War. Come on. Yeah, it's an oldie but a goodie. It's retro, yeah. Yeah. Can you discuss due process since it's the subject of these tweets? Due process means you got to go through the whole legal shenanigans, you know? The Emergency Act doesn't, with the whole asset freezing, you know, which is a whole problem. You want to go through the courts because that means that you have the levels of bureaucracy that allow you to challenge things. Doesn't really fix the problem, but it's better than not having due process, certainly. Why'd you downplay the noise pollution shit? Because you guys are incredibly fucking annoying, and I hadn't even made any prescriptive statements yet, so you talking about the noise pollution like it's such a big deal, before I've even talked about the thing we're contrasting that big deal against, like, it's, like, you have to wait before getting mad. Obviously, it's a big deal. Yes, I'm literally saying I think you should be able to send the military in to clear them out and then kill people who don't. What do I need to say to sufficiently delineate my feelings on this matter? I'm literally saying clear them out or treat them like enemy combatants. Like what? Well, not literally, of course. Enemy combatants aren't treated with the same rules as what you would do when you have military cleared an area. But like, what do you want from me? Jesus, what do you want me to do? Nuke them? Flamethrowers? God. How are we supposed to bust up right-wing protests? You shouldn't. Unless there's a good reason to. If there's a right-wing protest, but, I mean, if it's following the law, then clearly it shouldn't be broken up. You don't add extra laws just to be spiteful against conservatives. But if they're doing something that's harmful and you can make a good utilitarian argument for how, you know, invoking police action against them because they're breaking the laws, well, yeah, sure. But usually police break up protests, but the police don't do a good job with that because the police are right-wing. So, you know, the military tend to be a little bit more impartial when they're brought in on some of this stuff. It has due process. It's being tested in House of Commons and Senate. That's not due process. Due process isn't you need the House of Commons and the Senate to pass the thing that allows you to just freeze people's assets with no court order. That's not what due process means. That just means that's just how you pass a law, or follow through on the law. The due process would mean that you would have to have a court order. I mean, the procedure is probably different for Canada than America, but you'd have to go through a court order to freeze the people's assets. It's dangerous stuff. We have this here in America. In America, there are a couple of things that our government can do that don't require any due process or supervision. For example, no-fly lists. The no-fly lists that we maintain are completely opaque, basically. There's like no... it's basically just like the government saw your name and your name was half the same as the name of a guy in Afghanistan, and they're like, well... let's go, you know? Let's go. Let's detain you at an airport, bro, you know? Vaush, you want to make the government look bad when breaking up your protest to grow your movement? I kind of don't want to grow the Freedom Convoy movement. Last repost. Damn, that sucks. Wait, you can't be like, well, we believe the government should use explicit forms of power all the time because it allows us to consolidate our attention against the state, but also be covert about it when breaking up our enemies because, no, you can't, no, it's support the state being brutal and explicit with its power when it engages in its power. They have to be forthcoming, okay? I want them to be incredibly straightforward. What do you guys prefer, okay? Which would you prefer, okay? Would you prefer like which is more violent, okay? Would you prefer like the police having a shield wall that clashes with protesters where you get videos of them fighting and stuff and some people die? Or would you prefer, like, police blackbagging people in the middle of the night, identifying key protesters, bringing them to a facility with no address listed, and telling them that if they don't cut that shit off, they're going to be found in a ditch? No deaths. I'm sorry, which of these is more authoritarian? I could kill him later. I'd prefer the shield wall. I'd say the deaths are worth being able to prevent whatever happens, there. If it's geographically targeted and people there are determined to be breaking the law, then why is that bad? What? Why can't we just send in the military, Heem? What's wrong with just rolling in the tanks? Wouldn't it be cool? Come on, you're Canada. You don't even get as much action as America does. Just roll in the tanks, bro. Your military must be bored as shit, you know? How are they determined to be breaking the law before trial? That's an excellent question, Doe. I guess we'll never find out. Sure, we can do it. I just don't think it's better. What? The power of the state has to be explicit so we can consolidate against it. It has to be. Can you imagine if instead of just arresting oh wait, hey, I have a hypothetical for you guys. Can you imagine? So guys, you know who did commit illegal acts and were at times engaged in domestic terrorism? The Black Panther Party. It's true. I love them. Thank you. So which do you guys prefer? Them all going through due process with forthcoming arrests so all the information can be brought to trial in clear and like legally prescient ways? Or the FBI using an illegal surveillance program in order to undermine their movement quietly and covertly while minimizing the direct engagement with legal systems? Hypothetically, in case that might have happened. Possibly. Potentially. Vaush, there have been multiple arrests after guns and thousands of rounds of ammunition were seized. The shit is not legal. We're not talking about illegal. I don't give a fuck. Also, what are you, a fucking liberal? What? They found guns. I don't fucking care. Raid my house. I have more guns. What? We found bullets. You realize the Canadian government has more guns than they do, right? The Canadian government? You have a military. What do you? This is not legal. I don't care. What? So if a left-leaning protest is going on in Canada, one of them has a fucking Glock 19 in a case in their car. Yeah, we will freeze their assets, revoke their passports, delete their social security numbers. Like, this is it. You guys are fucking authoritarians, man. You don't understand. I can't do it anymore, guys. You are the slow bleeding death of the potential for direct action. Do you know why direct action used to be easier to do 150 years ago, even though everyone's teeth was falling out of their head back then? Do you know why, even though nowadays we have the ability to directly connect with, to fund, to organize, to ally with people all over the country, all over our area immediately to consolidate power? The reason why is because state power has grown more and more subtle, more and more complex, because it's no longer so easy as to just get along with your buddies at the workplace and then decide actually you don't want to go into work tomorrow. Everything has grown so complicated, and its complexity means that it's difficult to focus your antagonisms against any specific point. This is why it's frustrating arguing with institutionalist liberals who have no solutions to any problems, because they understand that everything would have to go through the American Senate, which will never pass anything, so they can't actually do anything. But then you're like, okay, so what do? They're like, well, eventually the Senate will get something through. No, it fucking won't. But that's all we have now, isn't it? Right now, American political action is narrowed down to what the Senate can pass, which is basically nothing. So we don't get to talk about anything. And now action against state and corporate power is limited to, what do we get to do? What's a legal protest these days? We have to file for a city permission slip to have a little patch of grass in a local park that you can have a sign on. What is it? You realize real labor rights were fought with blood, right? Miners and striking coal workers shot and were shot by police officers. It was a whole goddamn ordeal. And that explicit invocation, I would rather the Pinkertons show up to protests and start gunning down striking workers than the government passing back to work legislation. You realize we're never going to get anything fucking done if the only thing we have is this veneer of liberal institutionalist policy making, which can't be directly targeted because it's bled out through a dozen subsidiary organizations, right? Do you know why the Pinkertons are still known and hated 100 years later? Will you remember the back to work legislation on your deathbed? Will people 100 years from now remember the Emergency Act? Will they remember all the individual police officers' names who refused to participate in breaking up those protests? Or every soldier involved? Or everyone who participated at every level of every strike break? No, but they remember the Pinkertons. Everyone remembers the Pinkertons because they were explicit, because they wore their names on their chest and they died and they killed. And that is how you do things when you don't have the ability to handle things more quietly. If all those robber barons back at the beginning of the 20th century had had the ability to just freeze the assets of the striking workers, they would have done that. Trust me, they would have done that. And we would not have 8 to 5 work days or 9 to 5 work days. We would not have weekends right now. Everything would have bled off quietly and slowly. And who would the protesters have protested against? What? Would their local legislator, their federal legislator, the president? What? They go back home. I don't understand. This is one of the problems with bureaucracy, you know. It's good for some elements of decision making, but past a point, you have to realize that all the methods of positive change enactment are being crushed by systems that are so abstracted that it's not possible to directly challenge them. You know, people used to storm palace gates like monarchs because it was just a guy back then. It was a guy, and he had some guys with halberds. That was like a thing you could do. It's just a guy, maybe a family of guys. So it's just some regular guys. So challenging the fully armed military is easier, okay, Vaush? If this is what gets the liberals out of my community, man, it'll be worth it, man. Oh my God, you can't fathom. Please read Foucault. I am begging you. I'm begging you. Oh my God, ignore the fact that he's French. Please read Foucault. Oh my God, I can't deal with you. I can't deal with you guys. Oh my God. Oh my God. I can't do it. You don't understand how power works. None of you understand how power works. You don't know. You have no idea. You have no clue. You have no idea. How the do you challenge a government where they can pass legislation to just break your strike and also just, with no habeas corpus, freeze your assets? The legislation already existed. The legislation I was referring to was the back to work legislation. That's what I said, breaking a strike. The trucker protests aren't breaking a strike. In your haste to prove me wrong about something, maybe you should listen to the specific language that I use. I didn't say pass legislation to freeze assets. I said pass legislation to break up the strike. What's your solution here, Vaush? Send in the military. They can't do that without invoking the Emergency Act, though. Rewind this. Go back to the beginning of the stream and watch from the beginning. Infinite frustration. Unimaginable. I can't. Please get the dunk you want it so bad. Oh yeah, we were going to talk about the October crisis, right? Where Trudeau's dad did the whole, did the last invocation of like the equivalent, the War Measures Act, and brought a bunch of troops in and arrested people without any due process. Yeah. I don't even care. I don't even care anymore. I hate you. I hate all of you. You're such bootlickers, dude. Oh my God. You're such bootlickers. I hate you. I despise you. I hate you all so much. It's unimaginable. I can't even describe what you people would do. It's unbelievable to me. You would, God, you're all Minority Report characters. You realize you could prevent crime. You could have less crime if you could precog that shit, right? Don't do that to them. No. You are. This shit is exactly the logic that surveillance state advocates engage in. That's what you're doing right now. This is what people said when they were talking about the Patriot Act, you know? You're letting Americans die by not allowing the government to exercise these powers that you have no oversight over and no ability to check and go over or through due process. You're allowing us to die to terrorist attacks. Do you really think all these deaths are worth it, etc., okay? The answer is, okay, folks, the deaths are worth it. And by the way, they're usually exaggerating about the deaths. State surveillance tends to do very little to prevent crime and actually tends to do a lot to prevent civil liberties. Believe it or not, guys, this may seem like this tremendous shock to you fucking liberals. The government really doesn't care about preventing crime, like in the abstract, that much. In fact, they pass policies that exacerbate it all the time here in America, like the drug war. Like, they do this pretty often, actually. They clearly don't care. They do care about cracking down on your civil liberties. Your civil liberties are a thin barrier that protects you from the worst excesses of state power, okay? So if you give them the ability to circumnavigate your civil rights, like, for example, due process, this isn't going to make you any safer. Just send the military. Just send them in. Just have fun with it, you know? The problem with the Patriot Act isn't that it was suspending the law to more brutally award power to the state. It was that it engendered this exact mindset in so many people who grew up not knowing any other world. Yeah, a lot of people don't understand it. They're so afraid of death and blood. Don't get me wrong, me too. But they're so afraid of it that they're willing to accept things that are way fucking worse because of their fear of it. Like, they're so conditioned by the surveillance state mentality. They're willing to accept concessions to their civil rights if it means preventing even the possibility of explicit violence. I like the fact to me that there are legit like leftists who are talking about suspending civil rights being preferable to just the military clearing out some infrastructure. That is like, that's unimaginable. That is actually insane to me. I can't fathom that. Like the level of potential like danger here is unimaginable in either direction. It's unbelievable. But I don't. Civil rights aren't being suspended. That's not how it works in Canada. You're 100% wrong. Guys, did you know that Canadian civil rights aren't being suspended when you do the law that allows you to not go through due process to freeze people's assets? Did you know that your civil rights, which are legally determined by the government, are being violated when the government does the thing that allows the government to circumnavigate the legal system that is usually used to determine whether or not the government is violating the government-granted rights? You guys realize the Patriot Act also isn't violating your civil rights, right? I hate. Oh, oh, the liberals. Oh, the liberals. Oh, you're gonna get me. Oh, you're gonna get me. The military is a non-peaceful option. Oh, really? Really? Oh, really? That's crazy. The charter has a clause for the government to suspend civil rights. These tweets are so dumb. Well, Rem is dumb, so it follows. It's sort of in character for him. He's acting consistent. It's actually a good story moment for him. Yeah, my civil rights are being violated constitutionally, so it's fine. I'm very smart, Vaush. I just, like, all these people are, like, desperately, like, distending their assholes for the fat cock of the Canadian government to their civil rights out of them. Instead of just let the military... I don't get it. Just, why not send the military in? You guys realize that if any violence happens when the military goes in, the people who die on the protester side will probably deserve it, right? If you get a 24-hour military warning to clear out infrastructural, territory, and they fire on soldiers, like, okay, I don't know, like, okay. Like, all right, I mean, deserve to die? If they fire on soldiers? I mean, look, I'm not saying you're asking for it, okay? But if anything was asking for it, firing on the military is pretty close to asking for it. I mean, you can't say they weren't fairly warned at that point. Vaush, you're being anarchistic in how you look at this. Canadians prefer functioning government to use as clean a method as possible to deal with the problem. Sure, black bag protesters then. Violent means will always be the very last choice. Okay, sure. I mean, freezing assets is also violence. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, no, sure. Whatever, black bag people, you know, just quietly disappear people. Sure, whatever, keep it clean and quiet. Let the government get away with no bad PR every time. Just let the government just smoothly just disappear all of the problems, all the little, you know, inconsistencies and social fractures, antagonisms and agitations. Just smooth them all over, nice and quiet. Don't let anything get public. Don't let anything get loud. Don't let anyone consolidate any antagonism against anything the state does. Just keep it shh. You are the definition of liberal complacency. You know that? You are literally the 1990s, all right? You are the epitome of the 1990s. You are every person who thought that the world was doing well because your local suburban mall was booming, because your roads weren't cracked yet, and because you don't read the newspaper sections that talk about how the other half of the world is on fire, okay? I hate you. I hate you. I hate you so much. I hate all of you. Bastiat's question's legitimate. What's Bastiat's question? I didn't see. There are a lot of people in chat, and I'm also getting angry at, like, one person every 2 seconds. To be fair, if they're sending the military in, would they not just use kill-on-site rules? No! Not kill-on-site. You give them a 24-hour warning. The military moves in. The military is like, hey, you're leaving right now, and if you don't move, we're arresting you, which they can do. And at that point, they either leave, get arrested, or they fire at the troops, in which case, yes, now it's time. We have arrived at the point. Let's go. It's happening. Like I said, I mean, fair warning is fair warning, right? What is this? 2/3 of Canadians support using the military? Oh, well, there you go. If freezing the assets was as visible as the military, would you be okay with it? No, because it's still extrajudicial. But also, like, that's a meaningless question. Freezing assets will never be as visible as the military. That'd be like saying, like, that'd be like saying if like carbon dioxide hovering in the atmosphere was as visible as a firework, would I enjoy watching it more? I guess there are too many leaps I have to make to follow the premises. Vaush, I think I get your point about different forms of state violence and why the military is better, but could you end the protest by 1, ending COVID mandates, or 2, ending the military? What would you do? Oh, fuck ending the mandates. What, and make those cucks happy? Fuck that. Absolutely not. Double the mandates as soon as these protests end. Oh, they already ended the mandates? Oh, I don't know. I don't care. Just make them unhappy. Double them. I don't care. Make them get, like, an extra booster shot, even if it doesn't do anything. I don't care. Why didn't the state government allow troops in? They ended the passport, not the mandates. Okay, I don't know. Listen, whatever makes the protesters unhappy, I'm fine with. Which, by the way, sending the military in will make them unhappy, so. Not just freezing assets, they lose access to banks. Why mandates are so bad? Shoo, you're never gonna get it. Mandates are good because they make bad people unhappy. At this point, that's the only reason why I support them. That's my big get. I don't even know anything about the mandate law. I don't really care. First of all, they're Canadians. Second of all, they're Canadians. And third of all, I don't know. Can you see how this could make right-wing martyrs and further radicalization? That's the point! If the government wants to break up a protest, that is the cost of breaking up the protest. They have to use methods which allow for the public expression of political antagonism. Whether they're your allies or their enemies, allow that PR battle to be won or lost based on the legitimacy of the movement being broken up. But allowing the government to just covertly disappear protests extrajudicially through emergency powers whenever it's convenient for them because of economic disruption is going to hit us much worse than it'll ever hit them. We're the economic disruption guys, remember? We're the left. Well, Vaush, you have such a bad take here. Thank you, Savage Lib. Vaush using the mow down dipshit protesters argument, lol. Who would have thought he would copy that Destiny argument? How fucking disrespectful do you have to be to compare vigilantes in American cities gunning down protesters in American cities fighting for an end to police brutality to the military issuing a warning to clear infrastructure and then going in to arrest people who do not and only firing if they are fired upon by those people? How? What? Are you racist? Do you hate black people? Are you down with the blacks? What's going on in your head for you to compare these things? I'm genuinely curious. I genuinely want to know. Are you French? What is happening in your mind? Why would you... Why? What disservice are you bringing about? Your argument here, your comparison, your equivocacy is more racist than Destiny's statement originally was. That's the comparison we're going to draw then? Jesus. I don't have the strength, man. Dude, the Supreme Court weighed in on the blockade being illegal. In what reality, on your very slippery slope, will quitting your job be considered illegal and invoke emergency powers? Trudeau literally passed the Back to Work Act in 2018, I think. Yeah, the government makes laws. That's how it works. In what reality do you think they'll make quitting your job illegal? I can't. Dude, it's been like this all day. All day, dude. Scroll up, dude. This is literally existing AML-CTF stuff. You can be skeptical about supporting the privacy of payments without pretending this is the dawn of 1984. Dude, there was legal precedent for this. These laws have already existed, so it's not like 1984. There are already laws that allow you to do the things that you don't like. Oh, here's from my subreddit! I think there's a line between protesting and economic terrorism. The line is what the state determines to be acceptable! You fucking bootlickers! Jesus Christ! Would a worldwide strike not count as economic terrorism? Are you referring to widespread union strikes? If yes, they could be considered that if they're on a similar scale. Ah! I can't wait for the fucking anarcho-Bidenists in my community to fight back against general strikes because of the damage they're doing to the economy. I could scroll through this for an hour. Literally, it's not a joke. This has to be a troll, right? The Emergency Powers Act gives a whole range of tools, but they must be tailored to the present risk. Dude, bro, the emergency powers may give you a wide discretion as to what power you want to use, but trust me, the federal government will only use the powers they need to do the right things. so many people here don't seem to understand how sending in the military is less authoritarian than freezing assets. They don't. You're not okay with suspending due process? What are you, some kind of far-right chud? Look, I drew the CSIS on the guy's sleeve here. That's the Canadian Secret Service. You're worried about this being used against a general strike that'll never happen. You're worried this will somehow set a precedent when we all know how they treat workers and use far more violence. This is a nonsensical worry. This guy has comrade in his name. A general strike will never happen. Bro, you gotta live in reality, bro. A general strike will never happen, man. That's unrealistic, okay? There's nothing wrong with the government getting emergency powers to crack down on economic disruptions. Oh yeah, I got a lot of people saying that I supported January 6th. Vaush, what happened to being utilitarian? Sending in the military has way worse outcomes. You know what would have an even better outcome than me banning you from my chat, but is unfortunately beyond my purview, okay? Is if you sincerely reflected on whether or not you deserve to live, okay? Please go find the nearest mirror, all right, and reflect. Be free from my chat. Utilitarianism means that when I say something is good, that means it's good in a utilitarian way, okay? That's what utilitarianism is. Okay, I wasn't the most productive on Twitter, but, you know, past a point, Canadians after Trudeau finds out they were 10 minutes late for work, they cost the state $4.62 of economic activity. There are so many people here who are mad. God. We'll look at the Reddit thread. All right, we'll look at my community, and then I'll stop yelling. And the emergency anti-Canada stream. I agree with Vaush here. Good. No need to read the thread. Don't care. Didn't ask. Don't care. Didn't ask. Don't care. Didn't ask. Didn't ask. Don't care. Anyone who agrees with Vaush here is incorrect, though I understand the trepidation. Oh, shit. The Emergencies Act is being invoked because of the jurisdictional nightmare it represents. Everything thus far has been a provincial issue. Yeah, you have to enact the Emergency Act either way. Ottawa police bungled everything every step of the way. They didn't cede jurisdiction at the federal level. Invoking the Emergencies Act allows for RCMP involvement. That's their mounted cavalry police, I think. That's the Mounties, I think. CAF, Optics Nightmare. Let's do the Optics Nightmare. Let's do it. Get an Optics Nightmare. Let's go. Let's do it. Get a goddamn Optics Nightmare. Let's go. People jerking me off. Agree with Vaush on this one. Great. Now I agree with Vaush here. That's good. I disagree with Vaush here. I'm fine with local governments using every tool at their disposal to combat fascist activism. Oh, God. This person would have supported Nancy Pelosi trying to pass, like, additional surveillance legislation after January 6th. Look, I have a line, guys, okay? I'm okay. Listen, as long as these positions are already here, like, you know, if the feds want to track down people who broke into the Capitol building, whatever, okay? Better them doing that than whatever the fuck else they're doing, okay? But, the Invocation of Emergency Act, January 6th, for good things. True, you do realize that, like, the trucking protests are, like, packed full of white supremacists and, like, Nazis and overt fascists, and that the mandates are just like a thin veneer of a talking point that they're using to otherwise protest against what they consider to be liberal government. Like, their protests aren't even... Oh, no, I'm making a joke. Okay, all right! Sorry, Shu. You know, it's a little ambiguous with you sometimes. Just making sure. Oh, this one's the one that doesn't like me. Vaush going for on Twitter right now. He's completely melting down. It's hilarious. Reminds me how he was after that first Kink at Pride stream. I'm not wrong. 6 months later, okay, maybe I was a little wrong. Not only have I not changed my position on this, I'm actually more homophobic than ever before. Now I don't think gay people should exist in public at all because of this comment. Thank you. Second of all, ooh, if only it was faster to ban people on desktop. I just realized that reading is really boring. All right. Anyway, listen. The moral of this story is that even if you have dangerous fascists, okay, that are causing a ruckus, all right, the moral of the story is that you should if you're going to punish them, you should do it in a public and immediately evident way to coalesce antagonism. If kids got killed by the military, wouldn't that take over the narrative? What? Kids can't drive trucks? Look, if the military gives a clear out warning at a location and parents stay there with their kids and then they open fire on the soldiers, that would make them look pretty bad. Like those parents are massive. Listen, that's bad parenting, okay? Don't take your 6-year-old to the place the military says they're going to be showing up to clear out protesters. That's a bad idea. When doing it publicly, make it seem more authoritarian to some, make people more sympathetic to protesters. Yes, that's the whole point. Yes, that is the point. Yes. The government should use explicit methods of expressing its power when breaking up protests, because the alternative further abstracts and, hides the systems by which they enact their power, which is bad. Yeah, the state covertly breaking up the state covertly breaks up protests when it has the power to do so, okay? I guarantee you that every day in like China or whatever, protests get broken up, or leaders get like arrested that we don't even hear about, okay? The ability to do this covertly is the sign of a government that doesn't have to resort to explicit methods. It is a worse state of affairs, even if it's quieter and less violent. You really feel that way, Pigeon, about being held by your dear old dad? How do you feel about all this, Pigeon? Do you feel like you're stupid and stinky? Here, let's get one more big meow for the microphone. Ah! Wah! Artemy grabbed her tail. Artemy. Ah! So anyway, hopefully you all understand my perspective on this now. Foucault has done plenty of writing. Your biggest issue is that there's no due process. There's no due process. The invocation of emergency powers to circumnavigate due process for people specifically blocking economic activity is very dangerous. The framing of blocking economic activity as terrorism, which warrants the freezing of assets, is incredibly dangerous. And when the government cracks down on protests, it should do so in an explicit fashion. There we go now. Okay. We understand? Okay. What about the foreign funds? I don't care. You would get your point across better if you focused on the fact that you don't accept this reaction for any protest, regardless of the details of the protest. Blissful, if people want to believe that I am for some reason more permissive of this protest than of protests in general, like that if it was Black Lives Matter, I would be like, oh yeah, dude, freeze their assets. But now that it's them, the truckers, it's like, oh no, we need, like, I don't know. Like, I'm sorry, we have to engage with a reasonable level of fair engagement here. It seems like usually protests represent minority interests because majorities can use other form of political power. True, but keep in mind that majorities and minorities in a political sense are not numerical, but rather determined by social power. And in the nation state, the people under that nation state will always be a power minority, even though we're obviously the numerical majority. In fact, we're the totality, because really everyone, even people who head the state, live within the state. Against the power of the state, we will always be the minority, the eternal minority. And because that minority status is an element of vulnerability that can be exploited by those more powerful than us, the nation state must be abolished. But we're a while away from that, so in the meantime, I'll just complain about emergency powers, I guess.